Welcome to This Month in Jane Austen's World, where I explore what events happen in each month in Austen's novels. So, what happens in March? Let's start with Pride and Prejudice, where Elizabeth Bennet is heading over to Hunsford to visit her great friend Charlotte Lucas, recently married to the odious, Lizzie's words, not mine, Mr. Collins. Hunsford House is described as well proportioned and neat, and even gets a compliment from Mr. Darcy himself when he visits Elizabeth there in that rather cringe-inducing meeting. Elizabeth is treated to a tour of the house by Mr. Collins, including the shelves in the closet, and is invited to dinner with Lady Catherine de Bourgh, in which she is quizzed and judged by her in great detail. Over in Gloucestershire, in the leafless month of March, as Austen states, Catherine Morland has arrived at Northanger Abbey and is exploring the foreboding estate with Mr. Tilney. She is kept quite entertained admiring the old trees, luxuriant plantations, woody hills, and the kitchen garden. We all know that Catherine gets a little carried away imagining murder and secret letters hidden in trunks within the abbey, and ends up ultimately being banished from Northanger by Mr. Tilney Sr., a pretty awkward incident for a first-time stay with friends. Now over to Highbury, where Emma is pondering why the sickly Jane Fairfax would choose to come to stay in Highbury for the months of January, February and March, rather than with the Campbells in Ireland, where Emma says she would have had a much more enjoyable time. In Emma's view, visiting Highbury in summer would have been logical, but to visit Highbury at the time of year means Jane living through a season of good fires and carriages, especially in her delicate health, because of the weather. Here, Emma's curious mind starts to dissect Jane Fairfax's actions. Off to Mansfield Park, poor Fanny is stuck in Portsmouth with her family and lamenting how she misses Mansfield, having been away for 3 months. She is sad to lose all the pleasures of spring. She had not known before what pleasures she had to lose in passing March and April in a town. I must admit I would much rather spend spring in the beautiful grounds of Mansfield to the city of Portsmouth. Fanny misses the early spring flowers appearing in her aunt's garden and the glory of her uncle's woods and plantations. She compares this to the bad air and smell in Portsmouth. Poor Fanny. It's also the month of March that Mr. Crawford comes to visit Fanny in Portsmouth, and they take a 2-hour walk to see the views of the ships at Spithead and the island beyond. Spithead is a stretch of sandy bank stretching 14 miles long just off the coast. Over to Sense and Sensibility, and Elinor and Marianne are staying with Mrs. Jennings in London in March. It's during this stay that Elinor receives a rather bragging letter from Lucy Steele, in which she confirms that although Edward's living has been cut off, they are both very happy and are still very much engaged and intending to marry. She even tells Elinor that they spent 2 wonderful hours in each other's company the previous afternoon. Elinor, after reading the letter, hands it to Mrs. Jennings, who praises Lucy profusely. The sisters then receive an invitation from Mr. Palmer to stay at Cleveland at the end of March in time for the Easter holidays. Cleveland is a few miles from Bristol, so breaks up the journey for Marianne and Elinor to return to Barton, which is not far from Bristol. Just a side note on Easter during Regency times, Jane Austen often used Easter holidays as a time to travel. This is often mentioned in her letters and indeed her novels. So, for example, it's at this time that Mr. Darcy goes to visit his aunt at Rosings Park. At this time, people would have decorated the eggs, the shells of hard-boiled eggs around this time, often dyeing them with onion skins and natural dyes. They also wore the first Easter bonnets or spring bonnets in celebration of coming out of dark, thick clothes of winter into a spring bursting with colour and life. Now, the sisters do not actually get to Cleveland until the start of April, so subscribe to our channel to be updated on the April video, which will be out next month, to find out what happens during their stay. And we all know that quite a lot of drama happens at Cleveland. Unfortunately, Persuasion does not actually mention any events happening in March, apart from the birth of Walter Elliot, but it will come up in following videos in following months. If you would like to receive Jane Austen gossip in a Regency letter form, head over to our Etsy shop. We also have 3-month subscriptions available, and receiving these letters are really fun and make you feel like you're living in Jane Austen's world. Thanks for watching, and please hit subscribe.